They announced a ceasefire, and within 60 minutes, not 6 hours, not the next day, Iran was already firing ballistic missiles. The cameras were still broadcasting the announcement to the world when the first warhead separated in the sky over Israel. That is not a ceasefire breaking down. That is proof it was never real to begin with. Welcome. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now. We cover the stories that mainstream media buries under the headlines. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to understand what is actually happening, because what we are about to walk through is not speculation. This is what has already happened in the last 24 hours, and it is far more serious than most people realize. We are going to go through everything, every attack since the ceasefire was announced, every country targeted, what Trump posted on Truth Social, and what it actually reveals. The mystery strike on Iran's own oil refinery that nobody has claimed, and the single most alarming development of this entire update, the one that tells you exactly where this conflict is heading. Stay with us. Let's start with the fundamental question. Why would a ceasefire get announced if the shooting was not going to stop? The answer is the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Before this conflict, Iran's government was a layered system. Political leaders, religious authorities, military commanders with competing influence. The IRGC was always the most extreme faction, but they were one faction among several. Here is what war has done to that balance. The IRGC controls the missiles. The IRGC operates the drone programs. The IRGC commands the proxy networks. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, the militias across Iraq. Every piece of actual military power that Iran projects, the IRGC controls. And in a war, the people with the weapons become the people with the power. Iran's political leaders can sit at a negotiating table, sign ceasefire documents, and announce to the world that the shooting stops. And the IRGC can look at that announcement, assess its own interests, and decide the shooting does not stop. A ceasefire that leaves them in a weakened position is not a ceasefire they will honor. That is not analysis. That is what already happened. Within 1 hour of the ceasefire being publicly declared, the IRGC launched a barrage of ballistic missiles at Israel. Cluster munitions with warheads separating mid-flight were in the air while the world was still processing the announcement. Not hours later. Not after some provocation. 1 hour. Missiles in flight while the word ceasefire was still echoing across every broadcast on the planet. That was Tuesday night. Here is what followed between then and the morning of April 8th. Iran launched missiles at Israel, the UAE, Qatar, and Kuwait. Every major Gulf nation in the region has been targeted since the ceasefire announcement, with one notable exception. Saudi Arabia is the only significant Gulf state not struck. We will come back to why that matters. The UAE's major oil and gas infrastructure was hit with ballistic missiles after the ceasefire, an economic target of enormous strategic significance, struck with precision weapons during the hours that were supposed to represent the beginning of peace. Then came the morning. Kuwait was targeted with 28 Iranian attack drones, 28 drones against a single country in a single morning, under a ceasefire. The UAE was then hit again, a second wave of 17 ballistic missiles and 35 Iranian drones, with multiple casualties confirmed on the ground. And here is where it gets critical. The Strait of Hormuz, the single most important choke point for global oil supply on Earth, is not open for business. As of this morning, the only vessels moving through are Iranian vessels. Commercial shipping, international tankers, cargo ships, none of them are transiting. Approximately 20% of the world's oil passes through that strait every single day. Every day it stays closed is a day of compounding economic pressure on every major economy on Earth. Now let's cover what was happening beyond the direct Iran-Gulf exchanges. Lebanon. Strikes continued against Hezbollah targets after the ceasefire. Smoke columns and ongoing explosions confirm Lebanon remains an active war zone. Baghdad. Over Camp Victory, a U.S. military installation, smoke was visible following a massive attack this morning. American personnel, American assets, still being directly targeted in the hours after the ceasefire. And then there is the strike inside Iran itself. The Levan oil refinery was hit and destroyed, roughly 12 hours after the ceasefire announcement. The explosion was enormous. Iranian state media immediately blamed the United States and Israel. As of this reporting, no country has claimed responsibility. But there is a third possibility that cannot be ruled out. The UAE had its own energy infrastructure struck after the ceasefire. If the UAE retaliated by hitting the Levan refinery, if Gulf states are now striking Iranian soil in response, The escalation dynamics of this conflict just became dramatically more complicated. Strikes were also confirmed at Isfahan after the ceasefire. Multiple explosions at a city that has been strategically significant throughout this war. Step back and look at the full picture. Ballistic missiles at Israel 1 hour after the announcement. Strikes against UAE energy infrastructure. Strikes against Qatar. 28 drones against Kuwait. A second wave against the UAE with 17 missiles and 35 drones. Ongoing Israeli operations in Lebanon. An attack on Camp Victory in Baghdad. Iran's Lavan refinery destroyed. Explosions at Isfahan. That is what a ceasefire looks like when the entity with the weapons does not believe in it. Now let's get to Trump's Truth Social statements, because one of them contains the most alarming piece of information in this entire update. Trump declared the United States will work closely with Iran. He described a very productive regime change. He stated there will be no uranium enrichment, and that the U.S. will work with Iran to locate and remove all deeply buried nuclear material. On the economic side, he indicated tariff and sanction relief discussions are underway, noting many of the 15 points of the agreement have already been agreed to. He called this a big day for world peace. He described the potential beginning of a golden age for the Middle East. That framing, confident, optimistic, is in striking contrast to a reality where every Gulf state is under active attack and the Strait of Hormuz is closed to international shipping. But here is the statement that demands the most attention. Trump announced that any country supplying military weapons to Iran will be immediately tariffed at 50% on all goods sold to the United States. Effective immediately. No exclusions, no exemptions. Which countries is Trump talking about? China and Russia. Both were already supplying Iran with weapons before this conflict escalated, and that 50% tariff threat reveals exactly what American intelligence assesses is coming during this ceasefire window. Think about what a 2-week pause means for China and Russia. It means 2 weeks to fly aircraft loaded with weapons into Iran, 2 weeks to resupply the IRGC's depleted missile stockpiles, 2 weeks to replace every drone already fired, 2 weeks to rebuild the military capacity the American campaign has been working to degrade. China's interests are not complicated. China needs Iranian oil, enormous volumes at prices and quantities that keep the Chinese economy running. The Iranian regime surviving is a non-negotiable prerequisite for that oil to keep flowing. They were already supplying weapons before the conflict peaked. A 2-week ceasefire window is an opportunity they will use completely. Russia doesn't particularly care about a 50% tariff threat. Russia is already under comprehensive Western sanctions. Additional tariffs do not change their strategic calculation on Iran by a single degree. They will resupply regardless. So here is the trajectory Trump's threat implicitly acknowledges. During this pause, China and Russia will almost certainly rebuild Iran's degraded capabilities. When this ceasefire collapses and everything happening on the ground points toward collapse, Iran restarts with replenished stockpiles, reconstituted capability, and the direct backing of 2 permanent UN Security Council members. When this restarts, it restarts harder, larger, and more dangerous than what we have seen so far. Now let's connect the dots on the IRGC's targeting pattern. Missiles at Israel, the UAE, Qatar, and Kuwait. Every Gulf state except Saudi Arabia. Why that specific list? The UAE hosts significant American military infrastructure. Qatar is home to Al Udeid Air Base, one of the most critical American installations in the entire Middle East, central to U.S. power projection across the region. Kuwait hosts additional American assets and has been a partner in Gulf operations for decades. Hitting these countries is not random. It is a message to Washington. Your regional partners are not safe. Your forward bases are in range, and the ceasefire you announced does not protect them from us. Saudi Arabia's absence is deliberate. The IRGC appears to be calibrating its strikes to avoid triggering a direct Saudi military response or to preserve the possibility of a separate understanding with Riyadh. But the restraint toward Saudi Arabia makes the systematic targeting of every other Gulf nation more intentional, not less. And the attacks on Camp Victory targeting American personnel directly mean the U.S. itself is still being struck after the ceasefire. If American military personnel were killed or wounded in that attack, the political pressure on the Trump administration to respond will be enormous. Ceasefire or no ceasefire. There is one final development that tells you how seriously the American military actually assesses this situation, and it directly contradicts the optimism of Trump's public statements. Massive American air power is continuing to flow into the region, refueling tankers, cargo aircraft. The full logistics apparatus of American military strength is building up and not slowing down. An air bridge is being constructed. The United States military is not drawing down. It is reinforcing. Military commanders do not build air bridges and flood assets into a theater if they believe the shooting is definitively over. They build air bridges if they believe the shooting is likely to resume and they want to be positioned when it does. The divergence between Trump's public optimism and the military's operational behavior on the ground is a divergence worth paying close attention to. Presidents speak about what they hope is happening. Military commanders position assets for what they assess will actually happen. Right now, the American military is positioning for a resumption of hostilities. Here is where everything stands, as of the morning of April 8th. The ceasefire exists on paper. In practice, missiles and drones are still flying across the entire theater. Every major Gulf state except Saudi Arabia has been struck. Iran's Lavan refinery has been destroyed in a strike nobody claimed. Lebanon remains a war zone. Camp Victory in Baghdad has been attacked. The Strait of Hormuz is closed to commercial shipping. China and Russia are preparing to resupply Iran. And the IRGC launched missiles at Israel within 1 hour of the ceasefire being declared. We have made it through one night. The situation is not stabilizing, it is escalating. The most honest assessment is this. The ceasefire is a pause announced by political leaders who do not control the military factions that determine whether fighting continues. The IRGC has already demonstrated it does not consider itself bound by that announcement. China and Russia will use the pause to rebuild Iran's capabilities. And when this restarts, it restarts with both sides more capable and less willing to negotiate than before. Trump called it a big day for world peace. Maybe. But the missiles that hit Kuwait this morning did not get that memo. And the 35 drones that struck the UAE after the ceasefire were not flying toward peace. This situation is not over. It is not stabilized. Anyone who went to sleep Tuesday night believing the Middle East crisis was winding down is waking up this morning to a very different reality. Subscribe right now if you haven't. Hit the bell. You will not want to miss the next update on this. Like this video if it gave you analysis you couldn't find anywhere else, and share it with someone who needs the real picture. The ceasefire lasted 1 hour before the first missiles flew. The question now is not whether it will collapse, it is how much longer the world will keep calling it a ceasefire before reality forces everyone to stop pretending.